What's up, all my movie-loving maniacs? This is your boy Bankful B of The Last of the Factor, and I'm back with a TV review of Cobra Kai Season 2, Part 2, which dropped on Netflix last week, and it took me about a week to get through it, but I'm here, and here's my view, so let's review. Now, like I said, this is basically part 2 of Season 1. We got part 1 back in the summertime, and now we're here with part 2, and while part 1 was basically the setup for what we would get in part 2 is basically the Sekai Taikai tournament. And for those of you who've never watched Cobra Kai or don't even know about the Karate Kid franchise, I'm not going to rehash saying what it's about anyway, but I'll just give you a brief summary. So basically, Cobra Kai is basically a follow-up within the Karate Kid franchise. We follow Daniel LaRusso and Johnny Lawrence as they are full-grown adults with their own families, and they had a little rivalry still going, but they managed to put their differences aside for the sake of going up against John Kreese and Terry Silver. And now they both work at Miyagi-Do. They work with each other, but then things happened, and now they're at odds with each other, but they're still working together to take care of a common enemy, which is Cobra Kai. Now, of course, I like the Karate Kid franchise, but Cobra Kai ended up being a huge surprise for me. I think this show is a masterclass on not only how to continue a franchise, but how to do nostalgia right. I watched this show when it aired its first 2 seasons on YouTube, and then Netflix picked it up, and the rest is history. And the show also, to me, gets by on well-written characters and well-written character progression. But as for season 6, like I said, part 1 was basically the setup, and now we're at part 2. I don't know what's in store for part 3, especially after the ending of episode 10. But I will definitely say part 2, at least to me, is stronger than part 1, because part 1 is basically the aftermath of everything that happened in season 5, and everybody's getting along, everybody's at Miyagi-Do, but then things happen for everybody to be at odds with each other. But now we're at the Sekai Taikai, and Tori, she has jumped ship to Cobra Kai. They see Kreese, and then apparently Terry Silver is back. As entertaining as this season has been so far, well, at least part 2 was, I do feel like this show as a whole has kind of moved past its natural endpoint. And I just feel like this season as a whole we'll see once we see part 3, but I feel like this season was basically made because Netflix asked for it, and now it's just like the writers, they just throwing everything at the script, and whatever sticks. The show definitely should have ended a long time ago, maybe season 4, maybe even season 5, but here it just feels like to me, this show is starting to get into a little bit of Fast and Furious territory, where this show is starting to overstay its welcome, and like this show is just crazy as fuck. Like, the karate action is getting out of hand. Some of the things that's happening story-wise is getting out of hand. That being said, this show is still fun to watch because I like spending time with these characters. And like I said, this show gets by on good written characters. And just watching the season as a whole, as it being the final season, and somehow being an entry point into the Karate Kid movie that we're getting next year. In case you don't know, we are getting a new Karate Kid movie next year, and it's bringing back Ralph Macchio and Jackie Chan from the Jaden Smith Karate Kid movie from a little over 10 years ago. But this show is somehow going to be an entry point into that movie. How they're going to do that, I don't know. Now, as far as the three senseis, LaRusso, Lawrence, and Chosen, like I said, they're not completely on different terms because, like I said, the part 1, Johnny and Daniel, they weren't on good terms at that time, but let's just say things happened this season that brings them back together. And Daniel, he's still on the search for what's really going on with Mr. Miyagi. I'll explain that in a little bit. And Chosen, he actually went to Okinawa to be with Kamiko, but then the writers, I think this is a bit of a cop out, but basically he went there and he sees that there's a guy in a towel, and he thinks Kamiko is with that guy, but then he runs away before he could even see what the situation actually is. So maybe they're saving that for part 3. Who knows? But overall, I do like what they did with Chosen. More on him in a little bit. Now, Tori, she is grieving over the loss of her mother, as we saw at the end of part 1, and she has jumped sides to Cobra Kai. Now, this part as a whole, they didn't really do much with her, except whenever there's something to do, who in my opinion is the real MVP of this particular part of this season, because he's trying to figure out what's going on with Tori. He's trying to make things work out, and then the two of them end up with different people, and then there's a misunderstanding, and that fight between him and Quan was just stellar. That's probably one of my favorite karate fights within this whole series. It was tense. The music is tense. And he's really put through the ringer because he was made the captain of this team, so he's really proven himself a leader, and he already was a leader. And him being the leader also makes the relationship between him and Miguel strong, because even though Miguel didn't become the leader, he also encourages Robbie. I'll explain what happens earlier this season in a little bit, but Miguel, he basically realizes what his role is. He's really the heart of Miyagi-Do, and then he basically speaks life into Robbie. Like, you were able to do all these different things. You are a natural born leader. Episode 8 is really what really set this particular part off for me, because let's just say Johnny and Miguel, they have to get back on the plane back to the States because Carmen, she's having pregnancy difficulties, and so they're on the plane, and Miguel, he's being dismissive towards Johnny at first because it feels like the whole time during the tournament, Johnny has been giving more attention to Robbie, and then Johnny explains that basically, like, I didn't think you need help, and Robbie, this is the only thing he has going for him. And then he does tell Miguel that he does think of him like a son, which definitely broke Miguel down. It was definitely a good heart to heart moment from Johnny and Miguel, and I always love those doing this show. And then they do get back to the States, and she is fine, and she encourages the both of them to go back to the tournament and that she is safe here. And I just love this little moment between them, because like she says that karate brought them together as a family, and she truly is right. And shout out to the Rocky 2 reference, when you go back, win. Chosen, he's out of it for a little bit, but then he gets back to the leader that we all love him to be, and the cool uncle that we love him to be. And the partnership between him and evil Asian lady, as I kept calling her in the last video, but now I know it's Kim Dong-eun, but she forms kind of a romance with Chosen, and then I kind of like what they're kind of doing with her a little bit. Maybe they're alluding to it, but she's not all bad, and she's just doing all this for the wrong reasons, and maybe Chosen can bring that out of her. Now, I love what they did with Kenny this particular part, because he basically, someone slipped him laxative, and then he was able to lose the chance to go to the Sakai Taikai, but that's all because of Devin, in which she slipped the laxative in him, and she does eventually reveal to him, because he thinks that Anthony, Daniel LaRusso's boy, did it, but they eventually make amends. Shout out to Mrs. LaRusso for that. And he goes to the Sakai Takai. He even makes amends with Devin, and he participates, and he turns out to be a real badass. This is what I was waiting for Terry Silver. How is Terry Silver going to come back in the equation? And they do it. Well, first off, I guess the authorities are just non-existent in this world, because, okay, it's one thing if Chris escapes from prison at the end of the last season, but then with Terry Silver, he was about to go to jail at the end of the last season, but turns out the judge had the case thrown out. He had a really good lawyer, so locker room scene is definitely one of my favorite moments from this season, because all of them have been through a lot together. They've come a long way from where they started at the beginning of the first season. Got kind of emotional because it's like, wow, this series really came a long way. Like, who would have thought a Karate Kid TV series would work out? Now, turns out Miyagi-Do beats Cobra Kai in the semifinals, and then a team gets disqualified, and now Cobra Kai is back, and they're going to the semifinals. But before all that even starts, that's when the biggest thing happens, which is the brawl, which I was expecting to happen but didn't think it would happen until part 3, but it happens here. And everybody, this is the most craziest brawl I've seen. It probably tops the school fight. And so John Kreese, he is about to straight up unalive Terry Silver, but he loses the dagger, and the dagger ends up in the hands of Quan, who is about to fight someone else, and he's about to use that dagger on somebody, but accidentally unalives himself, and that's how part 2 ends off. And when I saw that, I was like, yo, how are they going to come back from this, and how are they going to justify this in part 3? Where are they going to go with part 3? Overall, I'm very curious to see where they go with part 3, but and like I said, this particular part is further proof that this show is really getting out of hand. It's moved past its natural endpoint, and it's probably a good thing that this is the last season. And I don't know how it's gonna work into Karate Kid Legends, which comes out next year. I didn't rate part 1 because, like I said before, I want to wait until all 3 parts are out so that I can really assess this show as a whole and assess how I feel about this season as a whole. So yeah, as you can see, X on all the ratings for right now. Watch Cobra Kai Season 2, Part 2. If you did, let me know what you think in the comment section below. This your boy, Bangful B of The Last of the Factor. Stay safe, wash your hands, peace.